The air in Pripyat on April 25, 1986, was filled with the usual hum of a Soviet model city. Children played in the parks, their laughter echoing. Adults returned from their shifts at the nearby Vladimir Ilyich Lenin nuclear power plant. Nobody knew that their ordinary lives were about to be shattered. Deep inside Reactor Number 4, a sequence of events was already in motion. These events would lead to a catastrophe unlike any the world had ever witnessed. The Soviet Union, in the decades following World War II, embarked on an ambitious program of nuclear development. Nuclear power was seen as a symbol of Soviet scientific prowess, a clean and modern solution to the nation's vast energy needs. Gigantic nuclear power plants like Chernobyl were constructed across the Soviet republics. The RBMK 1000 reactor, the type used at Chernobyl, was a uniquely Soviet design. It was a graphite-moderated, water-cooled reactor, capable of producing large amounts of power and, significantly, weapons-grade plutonium as a byproduct. However, the RBMK had inherent instabilities, particularly at low power levels, the very conditions under which the fateful test was conducted. These instabilities were known to some Soviet nuclear physicists but were not adequately addressed in reactor design or operational protocols. The culture of secrecy within the Soviet system meant that such critical information was often compartmentalized, not shared even with the plant operators. The RBMK reactors lacked the robust containment structures common in Western nuclear plant designs. The Soviet approach was often described as defense in depth, but this depth had critical gaps, relying heavily on operator skill and adherence to procedure, even when procedures were flawed or incomplete. The Chernobyl plant, one of the largest and newest in the Soviet Union, was supposed to be a flagship of this nuclear dream. The safety test on April 26, 1986 was not a spontaneous decision. It had been planned for some time and was actually attempted previously, but aborted. The test was designed to simulate a station blackout, a scenario where external power to the plant is lost. Engineers wanted to determine if the residual rotational energy of the steam turbines as they spun down could power the main coolant pumps for a critical minute. Ensuring continuous coolant flow was vital to prevent the reactor core from overheating even after a shutdown. The test was originally scheduled for the daytime shift on April 25. However, a regional power station unexpectedly went offline, and the Kiev electricity grid controller requested Chernobyl to delay the power reduction. This delay pushed the test into the unprepared night shift. The night shift, led by Alexander Akimov and Leonid Toptanov, was less familiar with the specific nuances of this particular test. As the operators began to reduce the reactor's power output, they encountered difficulties. The power level dropped too far, to near stall conditions, due to a buildup of xenon-135, a neutron absorber. To raise the power back to the test-stipulated level of 700 to 1,000 megawatts thermal, operators withdrew a dangerous number of control rods from the core, far exceeding the minimum safe operating limit. This left the reactor in an extremely unstable state, a condition known as a positive void coefficient becoming dominant. With the reactor now highly volatile and many safety systems deliberately disabled to conduct the test, the operators proceeded. Within minutes of the explosions, the plant's own firefighting unit, Paramilitary Fire Brigade No. 2, was alerted. Led by Lieutenant Volodymyr Pravik, these men arrived at the scene to witness an inferno unlike anything they had ever imagined. They saw flames leaping from the shattered remains of Reactor 4, and chunks of burning graphite and reactor components scattered around the building. They knew it was a fire at a nuclear facility, but they had no true comprehension of the invisible, lethal danger they were facing: extreme levels of radiation. Their training was for conventional fires, not for a radiological catastrophe of this magnitude. These firefighters, and those who quickly joined them from the nearby town of Pripyat, displayed extraordinary courage. They climbed onto the burning roofs of the turbine hall and adjacent reactor buildings, battling blazes to prevent them from spreading to Reactor Number 3. They waded through highly radioactive water, their boots filling with it. They were exposed to doses of radiation that for many would prove fatal within weeks. They did not have proper protective gear for such an environment, just their standard firefighting uniforms. By the morning of April 26th, it was becoming clear to some officials on the ground that a major catastrophe had occurred. Radiation levels in and around the plant were astronomically high, yet the decision to evacuate Pripyat, the model city built to house Chernobyl workers and their families, was agonizingly slow. For nearly 36 hours after the explosion, its 49,000 residents lived, breathed, and went about their routines in an increasingly contaminated environment. They saw the smoke, some witnessed the strange glow in the sky, and rumors began to circulate, but official information was scarce and reassuringly vague. Finally, on the afternoon of April 27th, the announcement came. Buses, hundreds of them, had been quietly assembled from across the region. Residents were told they would be evacuated for approximately 3 days. They were instructed to bring only essential documents, some food, and a change of clothes. They were told to leave pets behind and turn off their utilities. The evacuation itself was remarkably orderly, completed in just a few hours, but the promise of a 3-day absence was a lie. Pripyat would become a ghost town, its residents never to return to their homes, their lives irrevocably altered. The immediate human cost of the Chernobyl disaster was borne by the plant operators and the first responders, particularly the firefighters. Of the plant personnel on site during the explosion, 2 died immediately from the blasts. 29 more, mostly firefighters and plant workers, died within the first few months from acute radiation syndrome. These individuals endured horrific suffering as their bodies were ravaged by massive doses of radiation. They were the first heroes and the first victims, their deaths a stark testament to the lethal power unleashed from Reactor 4. Beyond these initial officially acknowledged deaths, the true human toll of Chernobyl is far more complex and contentious to quantify. Hundreds of thousands of liquidators, soldiers, miners, engineers, and volunteers were mobilized for the cleanup operations. These individuals worked in highly radioactive environments, often with inadequate protection or understanding of the long-term risks. While many received doses below the threshold for acute radiation sickness, they were exposed to levels that significantly increased their risk of developing cancers, cataracts, and other radiation-induced illnesses in the years and decades that followed. In the days and weeks following the explosion, the immediate priority was to extinguish the raging graphite fire in the reactor core and to prevent the molten nuclear fuel from burning through the concrete base and contaminating groundwater. Soviet Air Force helicopter pilots made hundreds of daring flights over the exposed, intensely radioactive core, dropping tons of sand, clay, lead, dolomite, and boron. These materials were intended to smother the flames, absorb heat, and stop the chain reaction. Many of these pilots received substantial radiation doses during these critical missions. Once the fire was largely under control, the next challenge was to contain the radioactive debris and the remains of the reactor. This led to the heroic and hazardous work of the liquidators. Miners were brought in to dig a tunnel beneath the reactor to install a cooling system, though it was ultimately not needed as the core began to cool on its own. Soldiers and reservists were deployed to decontaminate vast areas, washing down buildings, felling radioactive forests, and burying contaminated topsoil. The Chernobyl disaster was a brutal wake-up call for the global nuclear industry. It shattered the illusion of infallible technology and forced a profound re-evaluation of safety standards and operational cultures. Before Chernobyl, the focus was often on preventing core melt accidents. Afterwards, the emphasis shifted to mitigating their consequences and ensuring robust containment. The accident spurred the creation of the World Association of Nuclear Operators in 1989, an organization dedicated to promoting the highest levels of safety and reliability in nuclear power plant operation through peer reviews and information sharing. Regulatory bodies worldwide tightened their safety requirements. There was increased scrutiny of reactor designs, emergency preparedness plans, and operator training programs. The concept of a safety culture, an organizational environment where safety is the overriding priority, gained prominence. Chernobyl exposed the dangers of complacency, secrecy, and inadequate communication, not just within a single plant or nation, but across the entire nuclear enterprise. The lessons learned were hard-won, paid for with human lives and environmental devastation, but they led to tangible improvements in how nuclear facilities are designed, built, and operated around the world. Today, Chernobyl itself remains a site of paradox. The catastrophe at Chernobyl was not merely an industrial accident, it was a profound historical turning point. It exposed the inherent vulnerabilities within a closed authoritarian system that prioritized state ambition over individual well-being and transparency. The Soviet Union's initial attempts to conceal the disaster's magnitude not only endangered its own citizens, but also eroded international trust. This event, perhaps more than any other, highlighted the critical importance of open communication, accountability, and international cooperation, especially when dealing with technologies that have transboundary consequences. One of the most enduring lessons from Chernobyl is the paramount importance of a robust safety culture. This goes beyond mere compliance with regulations. It requires a constant questioning attitude, a commitment to learning from mistakes, and an environment where operators feel empowered to raise safety concerns without fear of reprisal. The design flaws of the RBMK reactor were known, yet the system failed to adequately address them or inform those on the front lines. The operators made errors, but they did so within a flawed system, using flawed procedures for a poorly understood test on a reactor with dangerous hidden characteristics. Human fallibility must always be accounted for in complex technological systems. The long-term environmental consequences of Chernobyl continue to be studied.